So please bring a round of applause. A lion member. So the point of this evening is there's a whole bunch of little empty shops. As you guys would know, there's a lot of empty shops in town, right? And so what we're doing is we're trying to do a bit of a reclaim back of a lot of these empty shops and try and put some things on them. And especially since the St. Barbara's Parade was on, everyone just seems to hightail it straight away afterwards. And so we thought we'd just try and put something on. Obviously everyone's hightailed it afterwards, but that's all right. We've got some really interesting things that we want to do this afternoon. So if you do have a chance, make sure you go and check out the other artists that are just doing different things in this area. And particularly for my project, I wanted to talk to Tim because I think he's one of the most interesting people in Kalgoorlie, if you know Tim. But to basically kick us off, you guys seem like, is everyone here local Kalgoorlie, been here for a long time?
Yeah.
Yep, excellent. So you probably know a few of this, and feel free if you've got things to add or jump in, please do so. So the point of today is Tim's going to lead us on a bit of a journey. We're going to spitfire through a whole bunch of random things that you may or may not have known. If you have a question midway through, feel free to ask it. There's no format here. It's just about kind of diving into Tim's brain and just getting it out there a bit more into the general public. So, great. So Tim, you want to just introduce yourself, your story at the city?
Yeah. For those that don't know me, my name's Tim. I'm the historian for the city of Kalgoorlie Boulder. I'm actually the regional historian. The city upstairs, Town Hall Archives, that's where I hide. We actually are now known internationally. I'm now working with national archives around the world. Because there was such a diverse population here, countries are now getting in contact with us to find more about their public, like their citizens that actually came to the goldfields. So now we're known internationally. I actually had some people from Queensland, random people.
Internationally.
Yeah. It was quite funny.
Overseas, yeah.
Because these people are tourists that have actually come from Queensland to Kalgoorlie. And they come up to the archives and they said, we were told about you in Queensland. I'm going, who? What? And so our little unit is now getting recognised all over the countryside.
And Tim, you've got some particular things that you do every day.
The thing I do every day is that after I've made my cup of coffee in the morning, you've got to read the newspaper. But my reading habits actually go back into the old Kalgoorlie miners. I read the newspapers from normally 100 years ago. I'll go in and you go and find all these interesting stuff that happened here last century. Literally, it is now last century.
So instead of reading the paper like everyone else says, you read the 100-year-old.
Yeah, I just go and start reading the old Kalgoorlie miners.
And how long have you been doing that for now?
Oh, I've been 9 years, 10 years now. I've been working in the archives. So I've read the newspapers. I've read from the very first edition of the Kalgoorlie Miner. But every day is that I go in and find the newspaper. So tomorrow is the 3rd of December. Yeah, so I'll go and find the 3rd of December, 1917.
It's the 4th. Sorry, it is the 4th of December. So yeah.
That's because there was no Sunday. Oh, there was the Sun, which was a Boulder paper. It was the only Sunday paper on the goldfields was called the Sun.
And so you still got 90 years worth of papers to read.
Oh yeah, we've been going for centuries.
And so just interest.
Sorry, yes.
You haven't thought of sort of trying to read a couple a day so you get a bit further.
I might get so busy and I might miss a couple of days, so I can actually go back and sort of go back a couple of days and catch up on all the news that was happening in town.
So it's well caught up on the gossip columns from years ago.
The ladies' letter. If you want to read a gossip column, it was from 1907. They started writing a gossip column called the ladies' letter. And it usually started, Dear Mary. It was this lady was writing a letter to her friend out of town. And she would write this letter about all the stuff that was happening in town, who was in town. I mean, you've got letters that say, Mr. and Mrs. Bloggs have gone off down to Perth. It was a perfect time for criminals to go, well, they're not home. And they used to break up people's houses. It was like an open inventory of who was in town. And it was crazy. And of course you read about you would see, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Bloggs have gone down to Perth, and then a couple of weeks later you'll read that about Mr. and Mrs. Bloggs' house being rolled, you know, because they weren't home.
Because you're reading them all kind of, yeah, right, okay. So, I mean, I've just asked you one question, and you can see how this is going to, we've got 30 minutes, so we're going to make this, we're going to rush through a few things here. Just curiously, I went and saw Tim in his office this week, and I asked him what's the most interesting thing that he has in the collection there, or it's been in his office. And he didn't really know, but then it's, what was it?
Out the back, I've got boxes. I mean, everything gets catalogued and put in a box, but there are items which I can't really put out on display. I've got them marked with biological hazards and radioactive hazards and all the rest of it. And I've actually, in the biological hazards box, are old needles. Now, who can remember the RTA? Road Traffic Authority. Yeah, some of you do. Here in Western Australia, the police force got split into two, and a part of it was actually run by local government, and it was the Road Traffic
Because that's what everyone
Authority.
wants, is local government with a police force.
Yeah, police force. And they handled all traffic. Anyway, in the collection, I've got they're like horse needles. They're about this long. They've got a big glass cylinder on it with a whacking great big needle. And if you had an accident and you were drinking, you got jabbed with one of these needles. I mean, these things are huge. And I don't know whether it's vacuum or whatever, but it would draw great quantities of blood. I mean, you could see this, if you look at the needle, they're about a glass cylinder, about, you know, a good 2-3 inches long. And they used to, there's blood all the way up the cylinder. So they must have taken a good swag of whatever was in the body. And they would send it off, and a couple of weeks later, it'd come back that you had a blood alcohol level or whatever, and so then you can be charged for causing death.
So that was a breathalyzer.
That was the
That was
breathalyzer.
the breathalyzer.
That they would, I mean, if someone was coming to me with a wacky great big needle like this, I mean, you know, you would sober up pretty quickly. and then I remembered.
It wouldn't make a very good episode of RBT either.
No, but you imagine Kalgoorlie cops
Yeah.
coming out with this thing. And another thing I had underneath my desk was a chunk of uranium. This thing has been in my office for ages. It comes from up the road. And it's virtually pure uranium.
You probably know where uranium comes from, though, shouldn't you? Like,
it's Goldfields uranium, so it's got to be good. And it was just sitting there on the shelf in this rock collection. And we were looking at it, and it's labelled uranium, and somebody said, that could be a bit dangerous. Looking at this thing. And then we called up the School of Mines, and they sent us one of the geologists down with a Geiger counter. And he puts the Geiger counter over this chunk of uranium, and it goes off the charts. It's like, and it turns out that most of it is the mostly harmless alpha and alpha and delta, whatever. The stuff. Yeah. But it's got a very, very, very low amount of gamma radiation. That's the stuff that kills you. And he was saying that don't lick it. And
but it's the council's property, so they need to put these signs on these things. Yeah.
And
Has it got a sign on it?
well, now it's actually in a glass jar. That the only radiation that it leaks out of it now is the gamma radiation. But he said you need a big lead box and all the rest of it. And I get more radiation if I go flying than I would if I go into my storeroom where this chunk of uranium is stored.
But as an interesting fact though, the fact that the city of Kalgoorlie Boulder has a piece of uranium as part of their collection. So just sitting in a compactus unit at the back of the town hall. So there's something that everyone can learn there today. We're getting really derailed here, but this is good. I've just picked up a couple of topics in particular. One, everyone knows the rivalry between Kalgoorlie and Boulder, and Boulder has a very different beginnings to Kalgoorlie.
Yeah, because you've got to remember Kalgoorlie was where they found gold, up the top end of Hannon Street. So you had a pretty good marked out place where we're going to put a town. But the problem is with Boulder, because the mines were so far away from here, from Kalgoorlie, a lot of the people couldn't have a horse and cart. So we go and live in Cal and we commute every day out to the mines. So they actually started building a shanty town out in Boulder around Richardson Street.
And to there, this day, it still stands. No, sorry.
Anyway, so
Brand,
yeah, so this what Boulder was originally this. It was actually a health hazard. It was rat-infested, diseased part of community, and the state government was at wit's end what to actually do with this shanty town that was growing up very rapidly around the gold mines. So people like the first mayor, John Hopkins, he actually approached the state government and said, what we really want is to become a municipality. And the government leapt on this because, great, we can now bring this thing under state law, and we can kill off the rats and have this, build this town. So the old Boulder literally gets bulldozed, and they shift everybody on, starting from Burt Street, and all the blocks are then numbered from 1 to 60, or 1 to 76, and they start building Boulder. And everybody's house there weren't houses, every shack was actually destroyed, and the people had to go and build a brand new house. So they had this massive rebuilding of Boulder. And what you see today is probably Boulder from about 1900 onwards. Is what you're looking at, and it really hasn't changed all that much. It's seriously, it seems funny, but it's what you're looking at with Boulder is what it looked like back in the gold rush period. So it's kind of cool, but once you know that it's actually risen out of rat-infested cesspits, you can understand.
Well, Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, that's it.
You know.
But the people of Boulder loved their Boulder. I mean, it was, Boulder. That's it. I know a lot of people that they're Boulder people. You read them from. I mean, I'm a total.
Excuse me. I believe there was never ever a gold mine in the Kalgoorlie Shire. They were all in the
No, there wasn't. The municipality of Kalgoorlie was really where all the money went to, and once where you go up to Porter Street, they had a train line. You know, the train that go out to Kanowna and up to Menzies. That was actually like the Mason-Dixon line, if somebody knows American history, where you've got the industrial north versus the sort of slave-owning south. And the Mason-Dixon line was this delineation in the ground. So once you passed over the Mason-Dixon line, you actually stepped back in time.
You knew it was a little bit more dangerous than the other side,
And you shifted from your rich industrial north going into an agricultural working class south. And this was like what Boulder was. You had all the money and power in Kalgoorlie, and once you crossed over the railway lines, or once you crossed over George Street, you actually went into a whole new world. And it never had a gold mine in it. All the money come here. So, and everybody else did.
Was the Kalgoorlie Roads Board?
But yeah, it was the Kalgoorlie Roads Board. Well, that's the entire Golden Mile was actually the Kalgoorlie Roads Board got all the rates from all the gold mines. Boulder was the same. Never had a gold mine in Boulder, but that's where all your working class lived in Boulder, and they would go off and work in the mines.
And so, sorry to keep moving on. So something else that we talked about. There's always been this rivalry. Obviously, you can start seeing with this rivalry between Kalgoorlie and Boulder. It's kind of been built in ever since the beginning. A friendly rivalry in some regards, but sometimes, yeah.
Just wait till you start playing cricket. Kalgoorlie versus Boulder in the football. Bring it on.
But there's particular one of the more noteworthy incidents between the two communities was when the mayors had their feud.
Yeah, the mayor of Kalgoorlie actually sued the mayor of Boulder. It was for £5,000, which was for an average working class person who was probably earning, say, £2 or £3 a fortnight, maybe at £1.5 a week. Suddenly these two mayors were at each other, and one was suing the other for £5,000. And they actually had an arrest warrant out for Finster.
The Boulder mayor?
Yeah, no, Finster was the Kalgoorlie mayor. And it was Rabish who was the Boulder mayor. And they had this business deal which went south. And Ravish was actually after his money. Ravish owned one of the hotels, and Fimster owned a couple of businesses. One out actually on the Golden Mile itself, and the other one was just in Egan Street, which is the next street over. And yeah, it was on for young and old. In the end, they must have had a meeting and sort of discussed their whatever else the issue was going, and it never made it to court, so I don't know whether cash changed hands. But that goes with the Kalgoorlie mayor. He was actually being sued by Hocking owned all the newspapers.
Yes,
He was actually being sued by Mackenzie, Mackenzie store on the corner of Maritana and Hannon Street. He was actually being sued for libel. Mackenzie became a politician, and Hocking owned a newspaper. And
So everyone knows that Hocking was the newspaper for the Kalgoorlie Miner, or in the newspaper of the Kalgoorlie Miner.
He owned all the media.
All the media, yep.
And he was the mayor of Kalgoorlie. You can't see
Same time,
conflict
so
of
our own
interest
Rupert
there.
Murdoch here in town, which is
Yeah.
something to be very proud of.
And he actually, Hocking actually had to resign from being mayor to deal with the court case, which was for about £2,000 brought on by Mackenzie. So they were, once you got up there, they were onto each other really quickly about any cash flow problems.
So, just on quickly before we move off to the council in particular, the council's got an extensive archive all the way back to
1894.
1894, and in fact it still has the original first rates book.
That was, it was something I've always been looking for, and okay, there's two archives. There's the historical archives, which I work in, and then there's the actual local government archives. Any record that of importance is actually kept down in the administration. And I can't, I mean, I can wander in there, but you've got to see the information officer first before they let me loose in there.
They're more worried about you getting loose in there. More
Yeah. But one day I was totally looking for something random, and I'm going through all these boxes with these pieces of paper in it, and I screamed, sort of like, oh my God, behaving like, scream like a girl, that sort of thing. And they come rushing in going, what's up? And I said, I found it. And they're going, what? I said, the first rates book. And it was a piece of paper. It was foolscap, that's all it was. And it had a whole bunch of, all the shops on it, and who was and wasn't paying rent, because they had big red lines through it with, so like, he owes us £50 or something like
It's
that.
just one sheet of paper.
One sheet of paper.
The entire rates book.
Was the entire rates book for Kalgoorlie, the first rates book. And it must have been a working document until they decided, really legislation, we need a proper book to put this in. But it's just a foolscap piece of paper. And I'm running around with this thing, and they're going, just calm down, just breathe. And it was one of those amazing finds.
And I think the important question everyone probably has is how much have the rates gone up since then?
Oh my God. And it was like, you look at it now. Actually, the CEO at the time, he come in and we said, look, I found the first rates book. And he's looking at me going, you're an idiot. But it actually was, if I was, probably gone up something like 500 or 600% when we look at it.
Wow.
I mean, that's just off the top of my head from what we paid.
Interesting to go, well, there you go, you've got a task for you to go and work that out.
Work out
Compared to the average wage, would be interesting.
Well, you go back, let's say, I was looking at a house in Heinemoa Street, up in Leamington, so we're talking the posh suburbs of Leamington Heights. There was a house up there. You're from up in Leamington Heights. Gorgeous. There was a house up there, and it was rateable at £41, which was a huge amount, and they were paying £4 a year on rates, and that's in the 1930s. £4. I mean, if anywhere in the country, if you were paying £4 for your rates, you'd be like, yes.
Yeah, well, nowadays that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So also, we all know, we're very aware that Kalgoorlie's had a very troublesome history, particularly with migrants that have lived here. It was particularly there's in terms of the goldfields being migrant story in the goldfields, is a very different migrant story here than there is to other goldfields. Like a lot of gold and mining places in Australia. One being that there's very little Chinese workers.
No Chinese here whatsoever. by the time they found the gold here in 1894, 1892, 93, the colonial government, the White Australia policy had just actually been passed a year before, and they literally had the power to decide who could actually come up to the goldfields, because there was no, you couldn't jump on a train and come to Kalgoorlie. You had to walk. So they could stand at places like Northern or York or somewhere like that, and they can say, you're not going because you're Asian. That's it. Most of the thing was Asiatics, and it was a very broad term. And they allowed the Afghans up here because you need someone to wander around with camels, but they were forced to live outside of town. You allowed the Japanese up here because they had already defeated Russia on the high seas in 1905, and they were allied to Great Britain, so they're about the same power as Britain. And so they said, you can come to Kalgoorlie, but you have to go into Market Gardens laundry. And then they decided, hey, the laundries are really good for running brothels. So they handled the vice as well, but never mind the gold. And Chinese were absolutely forbidden. We've got 3 individual cases where a single Chinese bloke comes to Kanowna, and he...
when would this have been?
We're talking 1898, 99.
Yep.
And there's a roll call, 220 miners come out, and they line up in front of this pub where this poor bloke was supposed to be working, and they told the publican, get rid of the Chinaman or we'll burn you, the Chinaman and the pub down. And so this poor bloke gets kicked off the goldfields. They drag him and put him onto a train, and he leaves. No compensation whatsoever, and that happened at 3 separate occasions.
So very welcoming.
Oh yeah, very. I mean, you've got to look at 1916. That's why there's so many Greeks in Melbourne, is because they all used to live here until 1916, and then we kicked them out of town because the Greeks they were umming and ahhing whether to join the Axis or Allied forces during the First World War. So the people of Kalgoorlie, the good English community we were, decided, hey, let's make their minds up for them. And we go and trash all their businesses because they're too slow in making up the myth. So they get kicked out of town.
Really?
Oh yeah, just wait till I get to the Italian story.
And so this funny, it ties into the war kind of conversation about the Italians.
Yeah.
There's actually there's a play that was written here. I cannot think of the name. The name escapes me on the Italian race rights here.
Yeah. But what happened was after the First World War in 1934, it actually started down at what is now the Hannons Hotel, used to be the Home from Home, and it actually started down there. An Italian barman, a drunk Australian, the barman said to the Australian, sober up, then come back and I'll punch your head in. But being the typical Australian,
That's
just
how
kept
most work now, really, in front of the exchange. Like, really.
and it was all like poke, poke, poke. And in the end, this Italian barman, Mataboni, actually took out this guy and took him out on the street and gave him a good thump in the head. And nobody knew. I mean, he was Jordan. What's his name? I can't think of it. It was Jordan anyway. Local firefighter and footballer, and you'd think he'd have a tough head, but as soon as it hit the concrete, massive hematoma, split open. And so this poor guy dies in agony 24 hours later. And so all the good upstanding British citizens here in town decided, that's it, we need to get rid of all the Italians. And they started down the bottom end of Hannon Street and worked all their way up. And once they cleared out everybody in Kalgoorlie, they stole grand theft tram, and they actually stole these trams and took them out the Boulder and then trash Boulder. It was so bad that the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini actually donated £50 to the Italian fund here after the riots. So it's bad when a fascist dictator actually gives us money to sort out our problems.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Isn't that one of the most
We
unbelievable
let the
things?
Chinese in and got rid of the Italians and the Greeks.
Yeah.
And
See, you had to be from the
We've
British
got plenty of Filipinos now.
You see, this is what makes this place so awesome, is that when we get up to 1960s, well, I mean, the only Chinese family in town in the 1960s owned the local Chinese restaurant. and I went to school with their son. And probably from the 1970s, you start getting a very diverse population here in town. I seriously want to get onto the Department of Statistics and find out what actually percentage of the population is now African.
Yeah, there's a lot of Africans.
And a lot of Africans in
Oh,
town.
there is,
And
yeah.
so are there enough to actually kick the Kiwis out? Because we've actually...
We're the fourth biggest.
Yeah, the Kiwis are put all. I mean, when you look at the first mayor of Kalgoorlie was actually from Timaru on the South Island of New Zealand.
Really?
We've had a connection
Wow.
with New
So
Zealand.
why are the New Zealanders here?
But that area was gold mining.
Oh,
So they all come
right.
over to West Australia during the gold rush, you see.
So-
And they're British. And they're white. And it's like, yay! They come down.
God.
Yeah, it's
And
Well,
they
you
blend in
can't
and
kick
become
them
mayors
out.
and
so
councillors.
we're going to wrap up in a second. We're running out of time. But I had so much other stuff here. In particular, I'll just quickly go real quick ones. In the street here, there was a shooting gallery.
Oh yeah, just up the street, actually outside the current Stoddards, the travel agency, just off the footpath was that a shooting gallery, and they were using .22 rifles, and this guy had walked
This
off
is in the middle of the street,
off
right?
the middle of the street, and you've got a shooting gallery using live firearms. And this guy sort of rocks up, he's going to have a crack at shooting whatever it was. And the guy hands him a loaded rifle here, there's the targets to start shooting. He fires a shot, the rifle doesn't cock. So he hands back the rifle, the bloke fixes it up, and then stupidly enough, he hands the rifle back to the guy, stock first. And this guy grabs hold of it and pulls the trigger and puts a bullet straight through the guy on the street. And the guy that actually fired, he disappeared into the crowd. We've got no idea who he actually is. But we've had several cases like that where someone, they're up in the Australia Hotel, this Kennedy and Sly. Kennedy walks up to this guy called Ginger Sly and puts a bullet straight through his head. Masses of witnesses, and nobody saw a thing. And it goes to court, and they actually let him off for first degree murder because everybody knew what a bastard Ginger Sly was, and so it was like, yeah, whatever.
Oh no!
And that's the court system at work. That's
There's 3 separate court cases that I've found
Wow.
where you've got witnesses, a guy is shot, and full of witnesses, but we'll let you off.
all right.
Oh,
To
wow.
finish the last thing, which is my favourite, is particularly TV coming to Kalgoorlie was a big. This is a real quick one, ladies.
Yeah.
So I know you do.
Yeah, TV didn't get here until the early 70s, and the first TV station we had was called VWA, and it was a private. Somebody you were nodding your head, you remember VWA. What it was private. They had the license, and they used to
It's
get
back
their
when anyone could buy a TV license.
license, and you'd be at home as a kid watching a favourite movie, and next thing the movie would get cut. And something else would go on, and it was that the bloke that owned the TV station didn't like this movie, so he would stop it and put something else on the movie.
Oh, you can only do that in Kalgoorlie.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, you know something about that?
No worries,
I
we're
want you to
all
go.
finished. And then he got his TV license revoked, but
Yeah, we ended up with Southern Cross and Southern Cross and the regional.
Yeah. But look, that was half an hour. So that was really.
Oh, that was great.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Tim is a wealth of knowledge.
Tomorrow, 10:30 to